Okay, let's see. So, let's pull this up. Should I have this ready? Let's see. Okay. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. Or the daily. That which was associated with the sanctuary, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. And the host was given again, and the daily by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of the desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, the Hebrew, unto 2,300 evenings and mornings, because there was an evening and a morning sacrifice. Okay, so why is it 2,300 days is an appropriate interpretation? Some would say, well, there's an evening or a morning sacrifice and an evening. That was continual, daily thing associated with the sanctuary. I'm not going to get into the interpretation here, but I'm just talking about why the 2,300 days are not to be split into 1,150 days. Okay, so the phrase in the Hebrew, I should pull that up, I suppose, but just trust me on that. You can look it up if you want. That's the original. Some other, well, we could do that. We could look at other. I think this is only KJV on this website. I forget. No, it isn't. Let's see. Let's look at the ESV or something, whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's just find another translation. Let's see what the New King James says. 8:13. Concerning days, it says days. Okay, let's try. The ESV is probably going to say it the other way. I don't recall. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Right there. It's at 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay. It's a more literal translation, I guess you could say. But why would they translate it days, right? Is that why people got it wrong? So if it's 2,300 evenings and mornings, and this is one sacrifice in the evening and one in the morning. No, it's interesting though. It says evenings and mornings associated with the sanctuary. Everywhere else this is mentioned in literal narrative, straightforward narrative, like in the books of Moses and stuff. Or, excuse me. So, everywhere else it's mentioned in reference to the sanctuary service, it doesn't say evenings and mornings. It says the sacrifices were in the morning and the evening. Why is that significant? So there were two sacrifices, one in the morning and one in the evening. So if there's 2,300 of those sacrifices or dailies, by the way, the clue is the daily idea, and prior to this here in the context, but some people want to say, well, that means the 2,300, but there's two a day, so split it in half, right? And they want to go that direction because then they can manipulate the time frame for Antiochus Epiphany as well. Something's going on here that's not correct. So it's talking in terms of this daily thing that it did, right? And it is interesting and rather something to note that the evenings and mornings here, that's how they say a day. It was evening and morning the first day. That's why they translated days in the King James, probably. then the sanctuary will be restored. So they want to make it half as many because then they can manipulate the days and the timing from the day Antiochus did this or that. The thing is, they make it 1150 and then they turn that into 360 days in a year. And they add up the years. You can't do that because those aren't. If you're going to make it literal, use the calendar literally, and a literal calendar does not have 360 days in a year. So that fails right off the bat. But here's another reason. So I'm just going to read this. Okay. Let's see. Some of this is going to be in a different context, but it has information in it, so just bear with me. The exegetical insight finds contextual support in the temporal until in the answer of verse 14a, just followed by then in the last part of verse 14. It is well to be reminded at this point that the explicit emphasis is the vision of Daniel 8 focuses on the end of it, the end time. The angel interpreter informs Daniel in explicit terms that the vision is for the time of the end in verse 17. Let's look at that. When I, Daniel, had seen this vision, so mind you, this is all in vision, a vision, okay, the cause zone. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Uli, and it came, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand this, and the vision is for the time of the end. Was Antiochus Epiphanes the time of the end? No, it wasn't. So that does, even if you make the time of the end the first century, which you wouldn't if you think Daniel 9:27 is associated with this, how is this Antioch Epiphanes if this vision is for the time of the end? The 2300 days is for the time of the end, and then you say it's Antiochus Epiphanes. Doesn't make any sense. This vision of the 2300 days, something about it is for the time of the end. Even if you make that the first century, it doesn't work. This is a problem for that view. This is in fact, it's a defeating argument for that view. No, it's Antiochus Epiphanes, but it's for the time of the end. But the 2300 days are 1150 days when Antiochus Epiphanes went into the temple and did this and that and blah, blah, blah. No, it's for the time of the end. Oh, well, it's a type for the end. Are you sure? Why is it evenings and mornings if he's literally taking away the morning and evening sacrifice, which is how it's rendered everywhere else when it's talking about the literal earthly sanctuary? It is necessary to discuss the temporal expression 2300 evenings, mornings in Daniel 8:14. Scholars have suggested for a long time that the 2300 evenings, mornings, i.e. 1150 days, is the unique way of a temporal determination which explains the total number of the omitted Tamid sacrifices regarding Antiochus. Since in the morning and evening of each day a Tamid sacrifice was offered, one in the morning and one in the evening. The omission of 2300 such sacrifices would signify 1150 days, since there's 2 per day. A recent English version actually translates the answer of verse 14 as follows: it will continue for 1150 days. They literally render it that way. Wow, what a mistake. During which the evening and morning sacrifice will not be offered. The TEV version, which is today's English version. This common interpretation calls for an analysis and an evaluation. The Hebrew text in verse 14 contains the relevant phrase, ad Arab Boker Alpayim Uslos Me'at, which is easily rendered in a literal sense as until 2300 evenings, mornings. The Septuagint translate the phrase by interpreting evenings, mornings with days as follows: until evenings and mornings, 2300 days. Several cogent observations militate against the interpretation that the phrase 2300 evenings, mornings are 1150 days, and that evenings, mornings mean Tamid sacrifices. The Tamid, so for one, the Tamid sacrifice ritual in the Old Testament employs the term Olat Tamid as the designation for the double burnt offering of the morning and evening, and not as an offering brought in the morning and again as one brought in the evening. The combination of morning and evening burnt offering is consistently called Olat Tamid. Therefore, a division of 2300 by 2 is not warranted. The sequence of evenings, mornings, quote unquote, with evenings before mornings hardly refers to Tamid sacrifices. The Tamid sacrifices are always designated in the sequence of morning before evening. Burnt offerings morning and evening, in other words, when mentioned in Exodus 29:39, Leviticus 6:13, Numbers 28:4, 2 Kings 11:15, 1 Chronicles 16:40, 22:30, in 2 Chronicles 2, verse 4, chapter 13, verse 11, chapter 31, verse 3, Ezra 3:3. In all those verses where it talks about the Tamid sacrifices in a literal narrative regarding the evening and morning the morning and evening sacrifices, that is, burnt offerings morning and evening in a literal word-for-word translation, it's never said it's never referred to as by the designation like a day is, that is, evening then morning, rather than burnt offerings morning and evening. But in this apocalyptic literature, which is full of symbolic language, it's offered in a very particular, specific way. That is 2300 evening, morning, not burnt offerings morning, evening, like it is everywhere else in the literal narrative, historical narrative. The post-biblical period perpetuates the sequence of morning and evening as regards the Tamid sacrifices. Thus, the expression evenings and mornings does not refer to Tamid sacrifice, but to a measure of time. 3. Exegetical support is entirely lacking for counting 2300 evening as mornings, quote unquote, separately in order to arrive at 1150 whole days. The sequence of evening and mornings as an expression for a full day appears for the first time in the creation account of Genesis 1, the language of which is reflected here in Daniel 8:14 and verse 26 as well. C.F. Keel has fittedly remarked, a Hebrew reader could not possibly understand the period of time, 2300 evenings and mornings, to be 2300 half days of 1150 whole days, because evening and morning at the creation constituted not the half, but the whole day. The expression evening and morning is a day. We must therefore take the words as they are, i.e., understand them as 2300 whole days. This is quite correct. When the Hebrew attempted to designate the day and night separately, they would mention the number of both, as in 40 days and 40 nights, or 3 days and 3 nights. Even in these instances, however, 40 days and 40 nights does not mean 20 whole days. Thus, other scholars have correctly concluded that instead of day, one says also evening, morning, like in Daniel 8:14, and that in Daniel 8:14, the day is designated as Erev Boker, evening, morning. 4. A final consideration calls for attention. Whether the 2300 evening mornings are correctly understood as 2300 whole days or incorrectly as 1150 whole days, in either case, whether they are taken as 6 years and 4 months and 20 days, or as 3 years, 2 months and 10 days, respectively, on a 360-day year calendar, there is no historical epoch mentioned in the book of Maccabees or in Josephus regarding Antiochus IV Epiphanes that would correspond with either figure. For example, the profanation of the temple by Antiochus IV Epiphanes lasted for 3 days to the day, which would only make 1080 days and falls far short of the supposed 1150 days, not to speak of 2300 days. It seems therefore exegetically sound to take the 2300 evening and mornings, quote unquote, as 2300 whole days and view them as a prophetic time period with the aid of the day year principle known from other prophetic symbolic time predictions. That is, it would be a consistent hermeneutic to do that, as everyone does with the 490 years or 70 weeks. The terminus a quo, or starting point, and the terminus ad quem, I don't know, I'm not familiar with that, concluding point of the time span of the 2300 evenings and mornings in terms of a particular year is not provided in Daniel 8. Emphasis is placed primarily upon what takes place at the end of the time span and beyond verses 13 and 14. It seems certain that in harmony with the content of the vision, through the addition, AUDITION, and its interpretation in time. In other words, in Daniel 8, the focus is placed upon the point of time at the end of the 2300 evenings and mornings, and not upon the whole time span, nor upon its beginning. As that's not mentioned. All that we have there is in verse 20, or whatever verse it was, that it's for the time at the end. Accordingly, the expectation that the starting point of the entire time span is to be found elsewhere is sound. This expectation finds its contextual support in 8:26, where the angel interpretation comes back to the evenings and mornings vision in verse 26. Vision without yet having explained the time element. The unexplained time element of Daniel 8:13-14 and verse 26 is taken up in the next chapter, which has definite links with Daniel 8. Among the links between Daniel 8 and 9 are the following: similar terminology. The designation for vision in the form of mare appears in Daniel 8:16 and verse 26 and 27. In the latter section, it refers specifically to the mare of the evenings and mornings, the mare. This term again appears in Daniel 9:23, right before the prophecy of Christ. Understand the vision, mare. Different scholars have recognized a link between Daniel 8 and 9 because of the usage of this term, which you don't see in the English because both terms kazon or hazon and mare, which are both translated in the English as vision, is lost in the English translation. A second terminological link between Daniel 8 and 9 is the phrase "at the first" in 9:21, which refers back to 8:16, where Gabriel's interpretation of the vision, the mare, is introduced. The third terminological link is found in the usage of a variety of forms of the verb bin, or to understand, in Daniel 8:15, 16, 17, 23, 27, chapter 9, verse 1, 22, and 23, leading into the 70 weeks. The same interpretive form, understand, ha bin, which appears in 8:17 when Gabriel introduces his answer to the end time emphasis of the 2300 evenings and mornings, reappears in verse 9:23, associating them with having the same time element, which is in the Persian rule of 457. This reappears in 9:23 by the same angel in the interpretation of the 70-week prophecy. I'll stop there. And I will be doing one with visual aids here to explain this and show this in with the text on the screen. So I suggest, if you don't understand what was said, to watch the first part again, because that's the clearest part. The idea would be that it ain't 1150. It's whatever it's saying 2300 days. If you don't want to make those years, be my guest. But they are linked linguistically to the prophecy of Daniel 9:24, and is said to be cut off from the greater vision of the Kazon, which means whatever happens either during or at the end of that 2300 evenings and mornings, the 490 years, which everyone accepts as years, as they should, that 2300 evenings and mornings, or Hazon prophecy, has to end after the 490 years. Why? Because the 490 years Mare vision is cut off from the Hazon vision, both having linguistic connections from chapter 8 and chapter 9 to chapter 9 in the Mare. They are two separate words regarding the vision, and the 2300 evenings and mornings almost certainly seems to be linked to needing to be longer period of time to be fulfilled than the 490 years, which has this, I would argue, has the same starting point, because the 490 years is therefore cut off of the larger vision and view and in the context, as well as All these time elements in the chapter 7, 8, and 9 should be followed under the same hermeneutical principle, a day for a year, seeing that everyone does such as, or does the same with the 490 years, which is cut off from the larger vision. And these terms come not in a literal form of a time span. Everywhere else in historic narrative, increments of time, like 3 months or like 3.5 years, is rendered in a as 3 years and 6 months, like in Luke and other places in the Old Testament. It's clearly giving symbolic periods of time with particular types of language embedded in apocalyptic literature. And we know the calendar they use does not have 300. If you make it literal, then you must answer the question. If it's giving a literal time period and saying it in every way possible, except for how it's rendered in literal terms in historical narrative of the Bible, why wouldn't it use a lunisolar calendar? Because it's prophetic time periods. It goes to great lengths to make that obvious to the studied student of Scripture. Thanks for joining me.